If you want to be an astronaut, you better be a good swimmer. Sadly, this isn't because the International Space Station has a super secret, super awesome swimming pool. The pools are on the ground, and NASA uses them to train astronauts for what they'll face in outer space. But just because they're not secret doesn't mean they're not awesome, like the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, or NBL, in Houston, Texas. Yes, the water really is that blue. No food coloring needed. If you've ever gone swimming, you know that moving in water feels different than moving around on dry land. It's a lot easier to feel the molecules all around you pushing against you. And whenever you relax and float towards the surface, you feel a net buoyant force pushing you upwards. But in space, astronauts don't float up or sink down. So in a pool, they need to be neutrally buoyant. And NASA has been using neutral buoyancy to help astronauts prepare for complicated missions since the 1960s. For example, the Gemini 12 mission made use of a swimming pool at a private school in Maryland, but that training went so well, NASA said, hey, let's get one of these bad boys for ourselves down in Houston. So in 1967, they constructed the water immersion facility at Johnson Space Center to prepare Apollo astronauts for their missions to the moon. And they kind of kept going, building bigger and bigger pools. Finally, in 1995, NASA began construction on a pool that was large enough to fit a bunch of mock modules of the upcoming International Space Station. Officially dedicated in 1997, the Neutral Buoyancy Lab is a whopping 61 meters long, 31 meters wide, and 12 meters deep. For comparison, that's about 9 Olympic swimming pools worth of water. It's half above ground, half below ground, and its 6.2 million gallons of water are kept around 30 degrees Celsius, so all the divers in the pool don't get hypothermia. Because for each training astronaut, you have 4 people in wetsuits down there to make sure everything goes a-okay. Oh, and to make sure the water is clean and clear for everyone in the pool, all of the NBL's water gets recycled every 19.5 hours. And when I say clear, I mean very, very blue. Like so blue. See, as far as we know, water is the only chemical that gets its color from the way light makes its molecules wiggle. When light shines on a bunch of H2O, the molecules absorb some of the red wavelengths and use the energy from that light to spin, stretch, and sway. And because that red light is gone, we see the leftovers as blue. In other words, all water is blue. You just need enough water to actually see it. Like, a glass of water looks clear, and most pools, like in people's backyards, take advantage of blue lining to make their water look bluer than it really is. But if you peer through a column of water that's 3 meters long, you'll notice a bluish tint. The Neutral Buoyancy Lab appears blue because there is just that much water. But NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab isn't just awesome because it's so big, it's a wonderfully deep blue. Right now, it's the only place where multiple astronauts can practice a whole underwater spacewalk together. If you're one of the astronauts in training, you'll don a pressurized spacesuit that previously flew in space and has now been fitted with however much foam and weights will make it neutrally buoyant. You'll also have a bunch of cables and tubes connecting you to the rest of the world that the divers will help keep out of the way as you practice stabilizing yourself and pulling yourself up, down, and around the fake ISS bits. But now that you're in the pool, it's important to avoid the impulse to swim, which would absolutely not work in space. Plus, the fact that you have all that water to push against and help hold you steady means you might not be wholly prepared for how you or your tools will move once you get up to the real ISS. Thankfully, you'll have plenty of time to practice. For every hour an astronaut expects to be out on a spacewalk, they'll spend about 10 hours training in the NBL. But in addition to being surrounded by a bunch of resistant water and your own personal dive team that's pretending not to be there, there are a few other important differences between the NBL and space. For example, you may be neutrally buoyant, but you're not immune to the net effects of Earth's gravity. So if you have to spend 30 minutes upside down to practice a space station repair, all the blood will still rush to your head. But in a spaceship hurtling around the Earth, there's no difference between up and down, no difference between ceiling or floor, which is why they have to put labels on the walls of the ISS. Of course, not all the training in the NBL is for the ISS, because you may have heard that NASA is sending humans back to the moon in a few years, and they're using all of the parts of their massive blue pool to get astronauts ready. Like up on the pool's surface, Artemis crews are practicing what will happen when they get back from the moon. Because unlike the Space Shuttle or Soyuz capsules, which have done the bulk of ferrying people to and from space, the Orion capsule is going going to splash down in the ocean. And on the floor of the NBL, NASA contracted a company that normally builds large aquarium displays to recreate the lunar surface. It has sand that mimics the moon's regolith, inclined planes to practice scaling up and down craters, and a combination of a very powerful lamp and blackout curtains that recreate the dramatic conditions where the missions plan to land. But it wasn't just a challenge to design something that acts like the moon while also being under 12 meters of water. Scientists also had to figure out how to make astronauts not neutrally buoyant, but sinking just enough to replicate the moon's gravity, which is about 1/6 that of Earth's. Once you've been weighted correctly, you can practice bounding around on a fake moon and test out some of NASA's fancy new equipment for extravehicular lunar activities. You could even practice planting a flag, because that's something you definitely don't want to muck up on camera. Training for a single mission will take hundreds of hours, but in the end, it'll be worth it. And after all that time training in a very blue pool, you might step outside your actual spacecraft and wonder to yourself, where are all the bubbles? Now, you might not get the chance to wear a spacesuit in lieu of a swimsuit this summer, but you know what you can do? You can acquire your own tiny swimming astronaut courtesy of SciShow. This month, we're selling a limited edition pin that celebrates just one part of an astronaut's rigorous training program: a dip in a very warm, very large pool. Float on over to dftba.com/SciShow and order yours today. And thanks for watching.